you could call meaning, for want of a better word. That just means you go, yes, that makes sense to me.
Yes.
But the idea that it's an integral part of the process, I came away thinking just what you said. I'm not sure it is always part of what I'm doing.
I think
I mean, but it's partly because I'm so that the word is, it's not fair to say it's alien. It's just uncomposted in me. So it's sort of I would never use it about. I'd never use it about transparencies.
Well, I think the same about performativity personally, but that I do think I've witnessed performative moments in performances.
Yes.
And I do think I've sometimes felt that I was part of something that momentarily had a sense of being performative, but
so when you're
it's not
that's
something
interesting. How those two are the two I would say probably are always present for me, actually.
yeah, so when you say what would you call what you do if it's not a performance, or is it that the performativity is different than performance?
Oh no, performativity is different from performance.
Okay, so what's performativity?
Well, my understanding of performativity is that it's where something occurs which is in some way transformative through the process of performing, but it's not the same as performing.
So it's an extra. It's something that suddenly arises.
Is it an extra? No, it's probably always there. But you can't mitigate for it. I think when I see people make a performance where they're self-consciously being performative, it's never actually performative. Like the performative moments are by accident, and they also change as you go along. I mean, when you're doing a performance a number of times, one night, the performative moment might be in one place, and another night it might be in another place, but that's because it's reliant upon the presence of the people in the audience. They gift the possibility of that moment. The idea that the artist can construct it, I kind of find myself doubting.
I'm not. I'm still not. I'm a little bit. I'm a bit unclear about what performativity is. I mean, maybe this is irrelevant to what we're trying to work through, but I don't. I'm just going.
Maybe we should go into this bit. Oh golly!
But when you say, Rosie, that performativity is always a part of what you're doing, what can you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly worried about describing it because I think maybe I do try sometimes to make those. Feels like I'm trying to make something holistic happen. It's like something where everything kind of comes together and there's a sort of moment of rightness about it or something.
Yeah.
And that feels like I am trying to do that. Find moments that will feel like that. I'm sure sometimes when I physically perform, when it's me performing, which is rare, that's my weakness, is I push for it. I can feel that that's a that's a frailty in my own performing skills. But that aside, I think when I'm making something, I'm trying to find a moment where the audience kind of comes into it, where there's a meeting place or something. Is that performativity?
Yeah.
In your book?
But I think the word's too heavy for what you describe.
Oh, that's interesting.
It does sound. I think when because I understand the idea of when you push towards performance, and I think I'm always trying to construct a way of doing something which I can't push for the performance. So there's introducing a random is too strong a word, but there's a sense of quite a few possibilities arriving at much the same moment, and in a way maybe it's noticing which one of those you emerge and is helpful and is constructive or is something that you can spin off rather than trying to find it.
Yeah.
It kind of comes through you and emerges the other side, and it's there.
Yes, I recognise that as well, actually, in different works, like something like Passage for Par, where I was sort of experimenting with something much longer, where the audience isn't engaged, where I'm not trying to, I was about to say lock them in, that sounds awful, but kind of pull them into this place of company or observation and sort of company, like they're all
Attention.
part of it. And attention, attentiveness. Pull them into a state of attentiveness. That's true. With Passage for I was really experimenting with what if I didn't try to do that? And what if the dancers are a mile away, getting on with their thing where they're really concentrated, but the audience is having barbecues or picnics, and sort of like two things are happening alongside. How would I feel? And I felt very uncomfortable as I saw wine bottles arriving on the beach, but actually I really enjoyed that. So maybe that was a shift for me, that you've helped me realise that. About you?
What about performativity? I think what you just described would be how I would describe it, and I like that image very much, that it's a moment where possibilities come together and there's something that feels right. But of course, I've been taught well not to trust when things feel right. I think that's what you mean, that you can't latch on to them. That's just not how performance works. It's
somehow being available to the potential of this particular moment, when some things are just arriving or slotting in or challenging one thing against another, or where the audience comes in and alters the texture of the room.
When I'm performing, I'm very aware of moments where it feels like something is coming together, and energy is rising between, well, it's usually Matteo Fargin and myself, and members of an audience. And I have a tendency then to quite consciously try and step back from the moment. It's something that Matteo and I have discussed quite a lot, because we've often experienced that if we become over animated by our anticipation of the rising moment, in fact it just dissipates. Whereas what happens if you don't always get it right, but what happens if you somehow it's almost like you literally physically shift back in place, even just inches, with your own attention, then it allows people in the audience to let go the bullying for attention that moment might do. And then somebody who's watching can relax and kind of move towards you a little bit. And that's for me one of the great pleasures of performing is that conscious toing and froing of this kind of pressure zone between the performer and the person who's watching or listening.
It's quite interesting that that's quite spatial as well, available, and I was thinking openness, that's it. It's like how open can I be when I'm performing, and how can I help the audience to become more and more open to what they're seeing? It feels like that might be what I'm trying to do. But that thing about spatially shifting back makes me think, Alexander technique, it's like that's about coming back in your brain and into your spine. I'm just curious, just as dancers, to talk spatially about pulling attention through that pressure zone, or allowing attention to seep into that space. Talking about the fourth wall, aren't we, I suppose?
Well, in conventional theatre terms, it's the fourth wall, but I think that I would risk to argue that contemporary dance is very virtuosic at making a much more pliable relation with
with an
people
audience.
watching. Yeah, it can be that solid barrier.
Yeah.
But we've done there have been so many artists have done, within contemporary dance who have done so much work towards investigating what that relationship is.
Yeah.
So for me, when you would use the term fourth wall, it rather simplifies the situation too much. It's a much more interesting dynamic than that, especially now.
It's very
Pressure zone, you said.
very nuanced, though, isn't it? Because in something like Table of Contents, I remember so vividly times in which, I'm just going to remember Andrea for the moment, Andrea Buckley, and she would be talking to a member of the audience, and at a certain point she would be ready to go and do the dance about the heart that she did. And there'd be this moment where subconsciously she knew she was going to move back, and the person in front of her, whom she just might have been speaking to, knew that a certain amount of the space between them was going to alter how it was made, how the molecules between them was actually in a state of altering. And when it worked beautifully, if the audience knew they had to let Andrea go, and Andrea wanted to keep just the right amount of tension, just the right amount of communication between her and that individual, and they would gradually separate out foot by yard by over the room, and it was just extraordinary when they could keep alter it, but keep the lines of communication between them. And if any one of us was too tired, you could just lose it enough. It wouldn't lose the performance, but you could lose the fabulously fine line that was between one and the other. Learned so much by doing that.
That's really interesting. It's a beautiful description of it. In Passage for Park, again, I've realised, listening to you, that what I made sure I did is the audience came along from the side. So the dancers, the 30 women, came along from the side. They were hidden behind some dunes, so they came along sort of horizontally into the audience's attention, if you like, and visual space. And I got them as close as I could so that the audience, if they were in the right place, would hear them breathing and talk and cueing each other, and the stamping and the wet sand, so that they would feel their bodies. Then they went a mile out. And so in a way I was doing a similar thing of hoping that I'd somehow connected their visceral presence as they went to the tide line, to the shoreline, if you sort of mean, to the sea, so that even though they were so far away, that little thin line was going.
But it's is it the fact that the dancers' knowledge? I'm not quite sure about it, but how the dancer has over years prepared themselves to be in that place. So there are layers and layers of understanding or of experience or of doubt or of questioning in them, so that there is a real substance within them. And it's that substance that as it travels a little bit further away, it's like a strong colour. It doesn't fade. It's still there.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't because on another occasion I can walk away from somebody and nobody's going to notice them even walked away. So what's held in what kind of how is that information built up within the dancer performer dance student, how does that information built up over time so that it is truly usable, and usable in variation, not just usable in one block?
What you both describe with these two very different performances illustrates to me why the idea of breaking a fourth wall is maybe not so relevant within the field that we work in contemporary dance, because what you're both describing and what you were just articulating then, Sue, is something about the ways that embodied presence or sequenced movement is communicated, actually whether you want it to communicate or not. That anybody witnessing that is already experiencing it at a much deeper level than than simply the visual. It comes through the eyes, but it triggers
it's the felt
neurons in the brain which are to do with those physical experiences, and that can withstand a situation in the round that you describe a table of contents, or a situation to be feeling somebody close and then they're far away on a beach, and that it's that seems to be what we're working with at some level. And I think you're right that you can become more sensitized, and that maybe the person watching reads that heightened sensitivity, which I don't know what a neuroscientist would say, but maybe it triggers strong responses.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it does. But I don't know about the neuroscience either. But the presence thing. If I'm working with non-dancers, so I'm thinking about that with that when you're saying layers of the training, and if I'm bringing people in that haven't performed before, the quickest way I can get them, I guess, to that place of presence, I do use the word presence a lot, so I'll use it, but that place where they are full of the dance, they are very present with what they're doing, is something about bringing them to a place where they are really attentive to their own to the task I give them, so that whatever it is they're doing, every cell in their body is attentive to that task, and then the audience, I think, is witnessing that attention, so it comes back to attentiveness and feels that attentiveness, like you would if you watch somebody mending a car, you know, and they're under the car and you can see they're looking at everything and they're understanding, and you know they're right with that engine, or a dry stone waller, or you know, or a child trying to write. I find that just as compelling and pleasurable to see that attention. For some reason, I don't know what it must be in my past, I love seeing people really engaged. And I think if they're really, and so the dancers on the beach, even though they're doing a very simple folk step, they're so engaged because they've got to be together, and they are performing and they know what's coming, and they're holding their attention to everything going on around them, from dogs barking to wind changes to water under their feet to each other. That's, I think, what the audience feels, and it's really juicy and delightful to see people in that state of attentiveness. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I like it.
But so then there is I have I was going to say a problem, and I don't want to say that. There are ways in which some dance seems to have been built on the aesthetics of the history of its making, or of its technique, or whatever else. So the aesthetics of it rise more quickly towards the audience, which is, you know, can be pleasurable and all of that. But I seem to be very, I'm sure other people are aware of that. And then there, and this is what I think both you have spoken about, there's the ordinary within us, which actually is extraordinary, because it is the attention we have had in our bodies all our lives, whether we're learning to walk or learning to draw or trying to fix something that you can't fix. And my sense is that many of the reason that dance arises up in us is the kinship towards the extraordinary ordinariness in what we've lived with. And therefore the aesthetic of it can fall away, and an audience, my hope is that they go, yes, even though they're doing something I wouldn't do, there's even if you can't even articulate it, there's the history of the extraordinary ordinariness is within me as it is within them.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting quiet because I've got to try to remember the kinship of the ordinary.
Exactly. It's been recorded, thank God.
Thank goodness it's been caught on
It's
camera.
so beautiful.
It's
It's so
Yeah.
beautiful, Sue.
but it's what you both say.
I know, but you say it so beautifully, and that's exactly it. For me, anyway.
Yeah.
I feel like that's it. We don't need to talk anymore. It's got that feeling to it, but of course we do.
The philosopher Alva Noe describes the impact of choreographed dance in a similar way. I won't try and quote him because I get it wrong, but the way he writes it, it's very similar to that moment of recognition
Yes.
of the extraordinariness of the ordinary, which is kind of how you put it. I wanted to come back to table of contents though, because there was this thing about this moment of Andrea Buckley finishing a conversation and being released into the possibility to move in the space. I remember very strongly from sitting in the performance, but there was something very interesting about that performance in terms of what we're describing of the relationship with the person watching, and also what impact the performance can have on somebody watching. Is that in table of contents there was a physical table, and was it on wheels, or I think
No, we had to
just lift it.
You had to lift it
But
around.
it moved around in the room, and what it seemed to do was that it became a kind of common ground that mediated between you as a watcher and the dancers. I think I even was allowed to walk up to the table at some point.
Oh no, you were meant. But the whole idea was that you would gather around the table in
that's
between
right,
various
parts. There was, by this very simple device of a table, and particularly because the table moved in the space, the meeting place of myself as a watcher and the people dancing was equal somehow.
Yes.
I could be also thinking together, feeling together at this table, and the table moved through the space, so the entire space was activated by this equality of meeting, and it's and I think that's something that contemporary artists have been concerned with and have explored in really extraordinary ways, and that's just one way.
How the meeting worked. Well, I also used to love it because occasionally the audience would pick up the table for us and say, "Where do you want us to take it?"
Oh yes,
and
I think I saw that. Yeah. It was a very beautiful device.
To have something that is physically shared between the performer and
But also the thing about the equality, and that's what I feel about your work, that there's a sense that we couldn't possibly do what you're doing in your mind, and we couldn't possibly be as sharp as you are and as inventive as you are with your hands. This is a dancer speaking, watching you. But the humour and the kind of, the way you bring it down to something that we can relate to. That's the wrong way. It's not down, it's across or something, but it somehow makes me feel like an equal human being to you. I couldn't sit there and do it, but I feel kind of I feel close to what I felt around the table in Sue's, and what I hope when I'm out, I think that's why I work outside, actually. I hadn't realised that. Another reason to work outside is to do that, so that the audience are on the common ground of a site that is shared, and they're knowing it in two different ways.
I prefer to think of the equality as being, I don't think it's real, because the performer is always in a
I know,
in a kind of stronger position, but it's potential. That I like performances that create an environment where there's always a potential for a meeting.
Yeah.
It may or may not happen. I mean, sometimes when you're watching a performance, you give up and close your eyes as a kind of act of protest. I mean, sometimes you can open them again and think, why did I close my eyes? I'm loving this now, but you have to do that. So it's not a kind of ideal of a doing together. It's asking a question about the possibility of recognition of each other. And I just think it's very important to say that, because otherwise we limit ourselves to an idealistic position, and that's very quickly can be critiqued.
Yes.
And it isn't that, but it is about asking a question. What would that space look like if we found ways to better recognize each other?
Yes, maybe it's the wrong word then. It's something about relatability, I think, I was talking about, in terms of...
No, it makes sense.
Yeah, in terms of being able to talk to the dancer and then they go off and do this astounding thing. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but watching you, something similar happens. But so it's not about... maybe the word equality is wrong. It's something about relatability. And when you talked about aesthetic work, where the aesthetics is kind of most uppermost, there's a otherworldliness that I feel I can't...
Distancing.
Yeah, I feel a bit distanced, even though I might really, really enjoy it. It's a different kind of relationship I have with the performer and the work.
It's
But yeah, you're right, equality is the one word.
I can't remember a piece of writing in which people were talking about why they might not like dance. And I'm not going to remember everything, but something that emerged was there's a body like mine in front of me, but it's not like me. There's we both are human beings, and yet this one in front of me is doing something that I think somebody used the words, they were slightly frightened because it felt slightly alien. But my sense is that we're really, really attempting not to do that. Whether or not we don't use that word, we're really, really attempting to say we are the bodies we are, and then there's this person is going to try and really discover more about it, and with pleasure and with discipline and with research and with experience. But somehow, how do they keep the fact that, okay, and the person in front of me who's watching, you have the same, but you haven't driven yourself, or you haven't asked yourself to do it, to explore what you are this way. You explore it in another way. You may be sitting at a desk, or you may be interested in sports, or you may be interested in something else. But is it something about how you try to make a situation in which, although you have developed some form of extremity, it's still the same, at base level, it's the same material.
I think the mistake aesthetic work makes is to think that embodiment is visual.
I'm so much about
embodiment is not visual. But I've got some performances this week, and I was rehearsing myself yesterday, and I have a sequence where I must turn around, and I realised that even aged 62, as I turned to the side, I was sucking my stomach. And so I thought, oh God, you think you're making progress, but really you are trapped in the worst body images even as
I
an
love
old
that, 'cause
white guy.
I bet you we've all done it in some ways, and of course we do.
But
funny.
as I perform at the end of this week, and as I turn round, and as I automatically suck my stomach in, which will make absolutely no difference because everybody will go, "There, yeah, he's let himself go." as I'm doing it, I'm gonna chant over and over again. Embodiment is not visual. Embodiment is not visual.
Oh, I think that's so good.
That's priceless.
That is. Okay. Yeah.
I think although a dancer is showing physical skills that the person watching may not have, I think there are two there are two things that help the person watching. The first is that most people do have an experience of dancing in some form. And the second is that most people do have highly accomplished physical skills of some kind, whether that be playing a sport or cooking or making things, sewing, knitting, woodwork, beautiful handwriting. I think most people have something that would allow them, even if they couldn't do the specific physicality that the dancer was doing, that specific dancerly physicality will trigger bodily memory of the pleasure of physical coordinations, rhythms at speed, and the sense of embodied fulfillment that brings. So I think there are ways in, despite that element of dancing, which is also about high physical skill. So I think about the hip-hop dance community, who I think in an extraordinary way balance pushing dance physicality to an extreme that very few other forms have pushed it, and at the same time always aware of what is in common between the people that might wish to enter that cipher. And within the hip hop dance community, there's another element which I think it's important to maybe mention, which is that you may enter the. So this I don't speak on behalf of somebody else, and I'm not. I'm not a hip hop dancer myself, but this is something that I've learned from working with the artist Robert Hilton. That you when you enter the cipher, you may not have those physical skills that are evidenced by the people in the cipher, but the understanding is that if you return, I'm making a circle on the table. If you wish to return again and again to that place with those people, then you earn your place. Both metaphorically and also physically. So there's something about, what am I trying to say? There's something about the way that dance as an art form has within it the idea that of slow accumulation.
Yes.
That it's never about something that is instantly gratifying. There is the potential always, either as a watcher or as somebody doing, that the possibilities accumulate.
I think I'm slightly catty cornering across something. When I began dancing, I thought that the technique would release potential in me. And over a period of time, I was also involved in going to the theatre or going to the visual arts or drawing or continuing with a little bit of art school or cooking and all of those other things. And then over time, I realised I allowed myself to go, all of these other things other than dance actually are the things that inform my potential, probably more than the techniques I was learning. So at a certain point, I might have been able to drop away some of that technical means in order to allow everything else to have its place within me as a performative artist. Now, I'm not saying the learning of the technique wasn't helpful, because obviously it was, but it was a lovely moment when I, in a way, could lift away from it, fly off it, and be honest about how everything else had actually made me the artist I hoped to be.
Pregnant pause. I'm just thinking about what Jonathan said and then what Hugo was saying about what made us dance artists, or what.
Well, that's what I was.
Yes, no, I heard it. No, I heard it.
What made you?
I mean, sometimes I really do censor my mouth moving and something coming out of it. But I'll be brave. I have a feeling that I chose dance as opposed to music, maybe, or even visual art, because of potential. I think that came up for you as well, because I felt like there was more potential for me to find stuff I didn't know about in myself, yes. Or not find stuff I would know, but there was more in there that could be unlocked. But also because of words, because at that point I didn't feel I was getting where I wanted to with verbal communication, and I felt like a non-verbal communicative way of having a communion, if you like. It's non-religious, but that word is present with an audience somehow I felt there was much more potential to do that within movement as a language somehow than other art forms. But it just sounds so simple to say that, or slightly naive, because you start getting into those sort of claims for dance as a universal language and all of that, and yet...
But that's not what you've said. You've said
No.
something
Different.
else,
Okay.
so that's what's...
It feels like, it felt like to me, I don't think I was aware of this at the time, but now that this relatability point, that I could reach more people through dance as an art form than I could in other ways, and reach them on this level of touching them in some way that to me felt like the most precious thing in my life that I would like to offer to other people, if that makes sense. It felt really precious, and it felt really intangible, and it felt, although we've been talking about the extraordinary ordinary, it felt so extraordinary and so not talked about and so not valued, and yet I felt it was sort of there. There was this hidden thing that to me felt the most precious thing about being alive.
There's definitely something about the relationship to language. And I wouldn't for a moment say that dance is not language, because I think everybody who dances experiences the rapid flow of naming things as you do them, and after the event or in anticipation. So language is present. But Sue, before we began this conversation, you were talking about the perhaps the unrecognized aspect of being a dance artist or making dance performances is that dance allows many interacting layers, and I think it's the absence of often of specific spoken language that allows these more unusual connections between things, and at rapid speed. The thing about dancing is it's even when we slow down, the pace of change is very, very rapid. That's what makes it hard to try and make a long dance performance, because the pace of change is so rapid. The fleeting relationships and glimpses of possibilities and directions that are taken that then stop or move in another direction, both physically and also in terms of image, are very rapid, and I really love that. So I think it's about, I mean, many dance artists use language, actual spoken language, but there's always this other realm where you're not held down by concrete meanings, and it's our greatest weakness as well. It's where we can be easily criticized for being meaningless, and it's just worth the risk. I think. Yes. What's the worst that could happen? There's a meaningless moment. It's not going to, it's not so damaging. It could become a great subject. Yeah. But you have to take that risk. But yeah, then there's a huge, when I have something to rehearse, and then I have to get up and do some movement sequences. When I sit down again, I'm a better human being. It doesn't last, but...
It's fleeting.
It's fleeting.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That's why I like being a dancer. So anyway, that's what I was trying to ramble towards.
No, I like that rate of change.
I like the rate.
Well.
Definitely. And maybe it is there's a film is, I can't remember what is it, Hugo? How many frames a second? Even though I know
24 in old-fashioned film.
24
film
frame,
or 25 in what we're doing.
Okay, thanks. So 25 frames a second is just, it is extraordinary. But I think we are going, there's something happening in us as dancers as frame upon frame upon frame upon frame. It's not necessarily linear, it's more layered.
Yeah.
And that's what makes, I think that's what gives us a huge amount of excitement when we can even recognise a glimmer of these frames one on top of another with little tiny bits of information but difference between each one.
And if we're talking about change and potential movement, that's movement, isn't it? It feels like, okay, so maybe words that, and don't get me wrong, I love language, that's what I'm working on all the time now, so I absolutely love it. But if it's a bit concrete, there's sort of concrete, the word sort of, even though concrete is actually hugely dynamic. Do you know it takes 2 years, it's moving for 2 years, concrete. Even after it's set, it's incredibly,
Concrete is moving for
it's
2
incredibly
years.
animate. Isn't that amazing? But anyway, in the language, we think of the word concrete as sort of being held. And as you talked, Jonathan, I was thinking, okay, so maybe there's something about this desire for me to reach others, or this communion place, is that if it's like this, if it's really busy with the potential to change and shimmer, I think that's really interesting, because one of my desires is to change things somehow. So that you've made me understand it more, change. Kind of, I feel I understand it more in an embodied way of this changing, like if you get an audience more open, then there is this potential for change, changing relationships, changing in themselves, for however fleeting. So that's helpful for me, thank you.
I was reading a book recently by the Hungarian neuroscientist György Buzsáki. It's called The Brain from Inside Out. And he speaks in this book about a research which seems to suggest that even when we're asleep, the human brain is producing random sequences of a finite length. The finite length appears to connect to the kinds of lengths that sentences in all languages have, or phrases of music, phrases of movement. As far as I understand it, I hope I'm right about that. And that the brain is obsessively, Buzsáki uses the word obsessive, the brain is obsessively producing these sequences, which at the moment that they're produced have no purpose at all.
Yeah.
But that then what happens is, as we move through the world, some of these sequences find meaning by meeting with a specific environment. And this, if I would think, why does choreography have an appeal? I would say that it's because it reflects something to do with that. Now, this is not a conscious human process, it's a non-conscious human process, but I still think there's something connected to that. But I love this idea that when I'm asleep, my brain is
creating,
is as a way to look after me in whatever environment I might meet, is just trying on sequences constantly.
Aren't you sometimes consciously aware of that when you're in that half sleep and you're like, stop? Do you ever get that?
Yeah, whether it's the same thing, I don't know, but yes, I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Obsessive. I like this shifting place. I'm really into this sort of bubbly place.
Yeah, and hovering. I like that.
Hovering.
It's like not having to be fully decisive, because actually the decision might edit a huge amount out. But if you're in the hovering place, then the little changes, you just might be that freer
Yeah.
to be informative. Or it could be that there is a sequence in there that then might meet the sequence that helps it into a more exact moment rather than remaining a sequence without meaning.
Dance is not about telling. I think other forms of theatre are more about telling a narrative or a theme, and dance is about doing. And the thing that you recognize is the doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not always a linear doing. In other, where might its kinship in terms of language be with poetry rather than with text or with novel always? Because I know we've mentioned between us, we've mentioned poetry in the past, and it does seem the unchoreographing of words in poetry in order to maybe re-choreograph it is something we value or learn from or look at.
Maybe with poetry, something about releasing a lot of space for interpretation, or so it's not poetry is. I guess it can tell, but it's my sense of it is that it's opening a space, even though it's incredibly clear in some way. It creates a world that you can relate to in many different ways. Maybe that's true of any art form. I'm not sure that's different.
No, I recognise what you're saying. That there's something about compressing the form of what you're doing to amplify moments, images, and removing things so that leaps can be made between images. And I think that for me, choreography has that possibility, and I recognise it when I read poetry. I sometimes think I've learned more about choreography by reading poetry than I have by practicing choreography.
Yeah. It's sort of, maybe poetry challenges your knowing in a similar way to how dance does.
Yes, say it.
It may, when you were speaking, I was thinking, Jonathan, of you said something, it lifted something away about, and I was thinking, yes, it lifts the conventional meaning of a word away, right away, so that you can relate to that word in a different way. So I was thinking, is that what dance does? Does it lift away a kind of more conventional way of knowing that is more how we're taught, or how we normalise living or something?
Yes.
It lifts it away from the normal or the convention. Maybe it's the convention in a similar way.
Disturbs.
I think I come back to that word potential that seems to come up when we're talking about various things, which I'm finding really interesting, because that's a massive thing. But what matters to me often, I've noticed, is drawing people's potential out in my terms, obviously. Or what makes me sad is when I see situations that won't allow people's potential to come out. I find that deeply sad, and I don't know where that's all come from, but I realise it's very strong in me. And the word keeps coming up when we're talking about dance, and I'm thinking, oh, that may be one of the draws for me. What is it about potential, expansion or something?
So it's, either something is at the periphery, and instead of only looking forward, there is something interesting at the periphery, and there's something a little unknown about what's at the periphery, rather than walking forward all the time towards something that you can see. And another thing that seems to be turning up is it's not only what is visual. It's obviously we're watching something, but I think the other senses have their value in dance hugely. So it's a richer sensory experience as well as thoughtful, hugely thoughtful. But we are used to using sight as the dominating force.
Yeah.
But poetry and choreography have in common that they are both perceived as difficult art forms. And
the one you don't earn any money doing.
I mean, yeah, and the one you don't have any money to do, and you can't earn any money from.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been round and round this argument all of my working life, and to some degree I'm exhausted by the argument, so I just come back to, well, this is what I do, I'm doing. But of course I worry sometimes that we're the kind of mystical arm of art making, that we deliberately mystify things, that there's a certain privilege in having the space to do that, and I can argue it to myself. I suppose in the end I would say that I keep walking away from it. I mean, quite
walking away from the mystification.
No, from I have at times in my life walked away from the idea of being a dancer. And I have always been drawn back to it. I mean, of course, partly because it's what I do and I don't have another way of earning a living. But also because at the end of the day, many of these experiences that we've been talking about today are just too important to me. And I do see that there are many human beings that I meet that recognize that, but it has become in my lifetime a more difficult position to hold because of the ways in which late capitalism places demands a certain value system. And also there are calls for greater accessibility upon all forms of art making. So I don't say that to pull the conversation down, but because I think it is a part of how we work as dancers and as choreographers, that we are sensitively trying to hold ground that is not always easy to hold or to justify, and yet there are always these glimpses of something which seems to make it matter to hold that ground. And honestly, I don't think that I work with enough younger people now, and from really different backgrounds, demographics, economic brackets, classes, countries, cultures, and it seems to me I'm constantly hearing what I recognise as a similar feeling that there's a ground somewhere there worth holding.
It helps if I get into, is this all pretentiously peeling off somewhere? It helps that I think that we, any fit human beginning their lives, explore their world and their environment through movement, through action, through play. Now, it happens that our culture, and a Western culture, and maybe a Northern Western culture, takes play and movement away from our education and from a sense of, if you're an adult, you don't do that. You think your way through things. You don't move your way through things. And yet all our early years are learning through movement and play and the environment you live with, and all our later years are about trying to adapt while you lose it.
Yeah.
So the arc of where movement sits and informs us is so huge and rich for every individual. Then that helps stabilize me if I happen to be dealing with an extended play, with an extended series of information about what movement gives us